This song lyric, from Bob Dylan's song Subterranean Homesick Blues, became the inspiration for the name of the Weather Underground organization. Formed in 1969, the Weather Underground rose from the ashes of the fractured Students for a Democratic Society and inherited many of its members like Bernadine Dorn, Mark Rudd, no relation, John Jacobs, and Dave Gilbert. Disheartened with the perceived lack of progress gleaned from pacifist protests, these newly dubbed Weathermen decided to do something a little bit more violent. In the manifesto which started the organization, the Weather Underground committed itself to a revolutionary struggle against American imperialism and sought to ignite communist revolution through militant action in the United States. The Weathermen thought themselves to be an American version of Mao's Red Guard, which was an armed student-led movement in China, which fought to instate communism in China and then in the wider world. After the Weather Underground was created, 6 of their members traveled to Communist Cuba and met representatives from North Vietnam and Cuba. There, the Weathermen set up direct contact with the Vietnamese and were instructed to, quote, bring the war home. To do this, the Weather Underground started an intense recruitment and training regimen, which included an intense system of interrogation borrowed from China, in which initiates were accused of weakness and belittled for an entire day in order to weed out the weak. Then, on October 6, Haymarket Square, the famous site of the 1886 riot, was bombed by the Weather Underground, and the Days of Rage demonstration in Chicago was set into motion. The Days of Rage was expected to be a monumental street fight against the infamous Chicago police with thousands and thousands of protesters, but in the end, less than 400 came. The protests went on anyway, as the Weathermen vandalized shops, destroyed windows, and totaled police cars for about 4 days. The riot ended in the arrests of 267 Weathermen and fell far short of their grand ambition to bring the war home. After this failure, the Weather Underground realized that their tactics had to shift. With their increasing use of violence and communist rhetoric, they were alienating other far-left groups, and the pitiful turnout during the Days of Rage was certainly a wake-up call. During their war council in Flint, Michigan, the Weather Underground resolved to wage guerrilla war against the United States. They started bombing strategic government installations and symbols of American imperialism, including private corporations. But what put the Weathermen onto the FBI's radar was the explosion of one of their bomb factories in Greenwich Village. This explosion, along with most Weathermen jumping bail after they were captured during the Days of Rage, turned the group into federal fugitives in the March of 1970. Finally, the Weather Underground had to go underground. In May of 1970, Bernadine Dorn, one of the founding members of the Weathermen, released a declaration of war against the United States, and the Weather Underground's bombing campaign commenced. They bombed the New York Police Department in June of 1970, the Haymarket Square again, and Long Island City Courthouse in October of the same year, the U.S. Capitol Building in March 1971, the Pentagon in May 1972, the Department of Health and the California Attorney General's Office in 1974, and the State Department in January 1975. The Weathermen claimed credit for a total of 25 bombings. 4 of its founding members were placed onto the FBI's watch list, and 1 member even made it onto the FBI's 10 top most wanted. But being on the run for 5 years and not having incited a glorious communist revolution made many in the Weather Underground start to rethink their militaristic policy, and soon, many prominent members started to openly support a pivot to legitimacy. This change was made possible by the FBI requesting that the most egregious charges against the Weather Underground be dropped because of illegal methods of surveillance, like wiretapping or searching without a warrant, had been used. But some members wanted to continue their militarism, and one man, Clayton von Lydegraf, a hardline Stalinist, managed to rally enough support in the group to kick out most of its founders, and then was promptly arrested in 1977 by 2 undercover FBI agents, whom he had accepted into the group because Clayton desperately needed manpower, because he kicked everyone else out. And this was the effective end of the Weather Underground. Most prominent Weathermen were even able to re-emerge into society without serving any serious time in prison because of the FBI's illegal activities. and many Weathermen either continued their activism nonviolently or just faded into obscurity. The Weather Underground was certainly a mixed bag. On one hand, they were considered terrorists by the FBI and a real threat to the United States national security because of their meeting in Cuba. They caused millions in damage and were certainly ready to kill police, but on the other hand, they didn't. Throughout my research, I could not find a single report where a Weather Underground bomb killed or even injured anyone. They always warned potential victims ahead of time and usually destroyed buildings at night when there would be fewer people. They fought not only for communism, but also to end the racism and sexism of their time. If the Weather Underground organization was anything, it was certainly complicated and contradictory.